This is quite irrelevant. What other people, what the political culture of other societies are, what they want, what their people might want, what some of their concerns might be. It's really quite irrelevant because we know what we're going to do and get out of the way if you don't agree.
They said, look, the neocons, we brought down the evil empire of the Soviet Union, and now we're going to bring down Arab nationalism as personified by Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad, and once that happens, you're going to have democracy. You know, the problem is those people have not set foot. If they've been to the Middle East, it's been to Tel Aviv only.
No, I don't think it's an accident at all that so much of the justification turned out to be fallacious, misleading, deliberately so.
They thought they had a place in history. They were going to bring down, obviously, a very dysfunctional Arab peninsula, as well as Iran, and they were going to change history. They believed they won the Cold War. And they said, all right, we won the Cold War because we were tough with the Soviet Union. We get tough with these people, and they're going to become like us.
It is fair to say that the Iraq War was a diversion from the war on terrorism. It certainly meant that people weren't paying as much attention to Afghanistan as they should have, and the resources that might have gone to Afghanistan ended up being focused more in Iraq.
If you attack another country with no justification, people are going to say, wait a minute, this isn't a war on terrorism. This is a war on this is imperialism. This is colonialism, you know. And this is why it's a distraction, because you need the help of these people. If you get this view that the CIA and the FBI are lurking around the bazaars and the souks of the Middle East and handcuffing people or assassinating, that's not the way the world works. You've got to have the help of the locals to identify these people and either put them in jail or remove them from positions where they can do harm.
In January of 2002, as I was sitting in the bunker of the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, and I and several colleagues were sitting around the one little working TV, and lo and behold, here came the infamous statement of the axis of evil, you know, Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. And we all looked at ourselves and went, oh my God, you know, here we are kind of in ground zero of Afghanistan, and Washington's talking in very belligerent terms about these other three countries, and we don't have Afghanistan anywhere close to being settled.
The only person Saddam was a threat to at this point, as we saw when the army collapsed, was to Iraq. He didn't have weapons of mass destruction. He wasn't scaring anybody. He certainly wasn't scaring the Iranians or the Turks or the Saudis or anybody else. It was a state that was on the verge of failure. Now it is a failed state. Failed states cause terrorism. You know, you can name them. Afghanistan, Lebanon, Somalia. Anytime you create a vacuum, it's where people flock to or discontented to fight wars.
Osama bin Laden had been saying for years, America wants to invade an Arab country and occupy it, an oil-rich Arab country. He had been saying this. This was part of his propaganda. So what did we do after 9/11? We invade an oil-rich and occupy an oil-rich Arab country, which was doing nothing to threaten us.
The only real connection is that having invaded Iraq, we are very likely to make it a focus of terrorism. We are likely to produce what the president has said Iraq represents, namely the central battlefield in the war on terrorism. Why? Because we've sent a lot of Americans into a place where they're sitting ducks for people who think the only good American is a dead one.
Iraq cannot be governed by Americans. I don't care what the intention is. I don't care if we truly want to build a democracy. It cannot be ruled by a foreign power.
We, as the one indispensable nation of the world, as we characterized ourselves for so long in the last administration, cannot contemplate that possibly someone else might not like everything we call the American way of life, and that they would, in fact, welcome us into their countries. This may not be the case.
The only tool in the toolbox of the Bush administration is military force. Military force is a very blunt instrument. It just doesn't work. We've created more terrorists in Iraq, and we haven't even solved the problem in Afghanistan.
One of the more ironic effects of the attack on Iraq was to buttress other countries in the conviction of the infamous remark by an Indian general after the first Gulf War, when he said the lesson of this war is that if you have to fight the United States, you better have nuclear weapons.
In some respects, it's as if Vietnam didn't even happen. It's as if a lot of our leaders have suffered some kind of historical and political lobotomy. And that's frightening. And every American should be concerned about that, because the United States ultimately is supposed to be an exemplar for the rest of the world. We are supposed to be, in Ronald Reagan's words, that shining city on a hill. Well, that shining city is looking kind of slummy right now in terms of our image abroad, and I think with good reason. We've violated, I think, fundamental principles that have guided this country's foreign policy so successfully since 1947.
You don't want your president to be seen as a hot dog. And when your president gets into a jumpsuit and gets in the back of a jet and lands on an aircraft carrier and then waddles out with his little straps between his legs, and that's not, I mean, you want a sign of kind of maturity and not testosterone blasting through when you're talking about things so fundamentally important as sending a nation to war and sending young men and women to their deaths.
There is a sense in Washington now that you can't raise objections to this because you're not supporting the troops in the field. I would rapidly point out that unlike almost anybody I know that holds office in this country, I've had two sons in uniform, both of whom have been in combat, and so I don't have to take any nonsense from anybody, nor will I.
Mark Twain's definition of patriotism is patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it.
Well, I don't think it's patriotic to stand by and remain silent while your country stumbles into disaster.
Patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels, and I think these are scoundrels. They have no argument now. They have no defense for what they did. The country is in a terrible international security situation that I think is perilous. So they're attacking the patriotism of others.
Having been an insider, I know that the insiders don't have it all right. They make mistakes, and indeed, there's more likely to be mistakes, and there's more likely to be misjudgment if there is no criticism.
It was Jefferson who said that our kind of government is not based on trust. It's based on, in fact, suspicion.
Supporting the Constitution, understanding what's in the Constitution, caring about the Constitution. That's why we don't have a king, because we have a piece of paper. So I think that is patriotism.
It's not just those of us who've been privileged to serve actually in the government who are the patriots. It's every citizen who respects and honors the fact that we have such a wonderful country.
To suggest that if you have a different viewpoint than any given administration, or if you're not supporting the president in policies that may be highly erroneous, I don't see that as patriotism at all. In fact, I would argue that any patriot with integrity is going to speak out if he or she feels that we're on the wrong course.
It's not unpatriotic to demand that Congress upholds its constitutional responsibilities regarding the declaration of war. It's not unpatriotic to be very upset, vocally upset, when Congress abrogates this constitutional responsibility by transferring war powers authority to the President of the United States, as they did in October of 2002.
Listen, when you guys were working NASDAQ and the dot-coms, I was out in Iraq trying to get rid of Saddam and almost got killed for it. And besides, almost going to jail. So it doesn't take a whole lot of courage for me to come out against the war, and I did at the beginning, but I was studiously ignored.
When we did the first Gulf War, when I came out of Baghdad in 1991, I met with the President of the United States, I met with the senior leadership of both parties, and the one thing that sticks with me to this day is the extent to which each one of them explained to me in very emotional terms the extent to which they had had to plumb their consciences to come to